Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I'd like to welcome you to day 179 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 300 partners from all over the world that have come together during this pandemic to provide an open space each day so that people worldwide can experience community and share their experiences and their aspirations, their hopes, solutions, visions of the future as we all go through this unprecedented and very challenging collective experience. Over the months, as most of you know, we have dealt with every conceivable issue because the pandemic has really challenged us to think afresh about the very identity that we humans have developed over the last 1,000 years and are now in the process of reevaluating in very, very fundamental ways. Today, we want to take up the general topic of love. Love in a time of COVID. What does love mean to us today? Love is one of the most universal words. It is at the center of virtually every one of the mystical and religious traditions. It's not defined very often, but it's used much. So today we're going to be contemplating the meaning of revolutionary love and prophetic empathy. Before we dive into this area, let us gather ourselves together as we always do at the beginning of our sessions. And let us just simply take a few breaths, relax into yourself, close your eyes. And for the next 60, 90 seconds, just a brief moment, attune yourself to your own heartbeat. See if you can listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive at this extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and with a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining us today, I want to begin our program by first noting that in a few days' time, the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump will commence in the U.S. Senate. Trump is the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. He's now being brought to trial on charges of inciting insurrection. In the months leading up to January 6th, just about a month ago, over the weekend, and it was also a year ago, over this past weekend, that the first case of COVID was detected in the United States. Over the last year, there's been public health turbulence worldwide as countries all over the world had to engage with a pandemic that started off slowly but was so pernicious in its effectiveness that economies around the world were brought to a standstill. People went into lockdown and began to engage in physical distancing and in all kinds of new social constraints. Just read an article the other day on the effect of not being able to kiss on the cheek in France, and the turmoil, the psycho-emotional turmoil that's caused a culture that is used to embracing and kissing one another. And in a peremptory way, that practice was brought to a halt. We've had division, and love is not something we've contemplated much in the world. Over the last year, we've been in a state of consternation. We've been in a state of suspicion about our governments. We've been in a state of vulnerability to our own health. We've been concerned about the increasing fragility of the environment. And perhaps most profoundly, we've now entered a world in which parallel universes are prospering, and fake news is news, and truth and the lie have commingled with one another to such a degree that it's hard to know where truth is in an increasingly divided world where people are believing passionately in falsehoods. And so the progressive community has been challenged in very acute ways to understand, how do you love your neighbor as yourself when your neighbor hates you and doesn't agree with a single thing that you hold to be true? And that's our world. And that's why I'm very pleased today, and privileged, in fact, to be able to welcome Kat Zavis and Michael Lerner. Most of you know of the network of spiritual progressives that Michael and others have been developing over decades now. Michael is one of the great rabbis in Judaism in the United States. And Kat has been at the executive directorship of the network for some time. Another just stalwart in the field, working tirelessly, as I know most of you on this Humanity Rising broadcast have dedicated their lives 24/7, 365 to making a better world. And so today we're going to be contemplating revolutionary love with Kat and Michael, and the need for prophetic empathy in a world that is so full of contradictions. It's hard to know where love begins and love should end. So Kat, I'll turn the program initially over to you. And thank you very much with Michael for joining us on our program today.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us. It's so amazing to be here. I'm just taking in your words about where we're at in this historical moment. Last night, I was watching some amazing videos about women in the Congress. It was particularly women in the Congress speaking, in the US Congress, speaking about the insurrection and their experience of it. And I was so moved by their courage and honesty and forthrightness, and hearing them speak and hearing other people speak truth to power, whether they're in the US Congress or just on the streets, has been actually, I went to bed last night feeling incredibly hopeful that we're living in a particular moment in history where some of the historical lies that we've all been taught are starting to unravel and crumble. And it's giving me hope. So, and I want to introduce Rabbi Michael Lerner. So I already saw in the chat that some of you know him. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start with a bit of a introduction for a little bit, and Michael will jump in and out, and we'll engage in a conversation, and then you can put your questions in the chat for us. So Michael, do you want to, Michael, in addition to founding the Network of Spiritual Progressives, also founded and started Tikkun magazine now over 37 years ago, I believe, if I'm right about that, and has certainly been at the vanguard and leading movements for social change and social justice and integrating spirituality into our social change movements for all those years and beyond. And that's what we're really going to be talking about today. Michael, do you want to say hello and I'll continue?
Sure. Just it's great to be here with you, Kat, and I want to just pay tribute to Jim Garrison for several decades of work for humanity, and appreciate how much he's done in a whole variety of ways in his creativity. And so it's an honor to be with you, Jim.
Great. So as Jim was mentioning, we are really at a pivotal time in our history, a time that's going to require so much more than a change in this country and in countries throughout the world of administration. It requires a change of our consciousness, and also a change to the systems and structures on which all societies were founded and function. In the United States and in many, many countries, if not most, if not all countries in the world, the beliefs and values on which our country was founded, imperialism, racism, patriarchy, and eventually capitalism, are killing us, undermining our capacity to see each other as embodiments of, to celebrate the awe and wonder of our universe. It's killing the life support system of our planet, on which all life depends. And this is a moment in which we are all being called to wake up and be transformed, and to transform, and to admit that these systems and structures are destroying us and our planet. So what do we do? How do we move from where we are right now to where we so deeply yearn to be in this loving and just world? One thing that we need to do is we need to change the way we create social change movements and the way we talk about people who are not yet with us. So we need to create movements that are welcoming to all people, that actually put forth a vision of the world we want and help people understand and be able to articulate the ways in which our beliefs about the kind of world we live in and the ethos of our society poisons us all, excuse me. So our traditions, spiritual traditions, religious traditions, all throughout history, really, there's been two worldviews in struggle with one another. On one hand, there's this worldview of love and interdependence and abundance. And on the other hand, there's this worldview of fear and power over and scarcity. And these two worldviews or stories live within each of us in our society. And the predominant worldview that wins a lot of power, that wins a lot of airtime in the media, that certainly in the United States over the last 4 years under the previous president, was the worldview being blasted on Twitter and on social media and out of the White House day in and day out, is that worldview of fear and power over and scarcity. And that worldview has a powerful, it's almost like a powerful addictive quality, because when we get fearful, we shrink. We don't believe we can change the world. And we turn inward to protect ourselves as individuals, as a community, and as a society. In addition to this worldview, though, the competitive marketplace, capitalism, buttresses it, because in that ethos, in that story, we are told that if someone else gets ahead, you will not get ahead. Therefore, you need to maximize your own self-interest. So in that ethos, in that model, in that reality in which our society exists, being greedy, maximizing money and power without regard to the well-being of other people or the planet are just the rational thing to do. That's what we have to do. And in this pandemic, we've seen that so powerfully, that maximizing money and power and profit actually has resulted in people and the planet being dispensable. So sustaining our lives and sustaining the planet are completely contrary to the competitive marketplace, to the ethos of capitalism. Because if we want a sustainable world, if we want a world in which we as human beings, in which animal life and plant life and the planet itself can survive and thrive, capitalism is not the economic system that will get us there. Well, I imagine in these calls, in these presentations, this is spoken about. It's not spoken about in mainstream society at all. It's not addressed. We do not talk about the way that capitalism is toxic to our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual well-being and that of the planet. We often convince ourselves that we can create conscious capitalism, kinder, gentler capitalism, but that's simply not true. In fact, in many ways, that is what in our country, the Democrats and throughout the world, neoliberal policies have been trying to do. They put forth policies and proposals that take the sting out of the harshest elements of capitalism, but leave its foundation in place. And as such, they failed on all accounts, neither addressing the urgent needs of the environmental catastrophe nor human needs. When we try and balance the needs of people, the planet, and profits always take precedent. So we need to create an entirely new way of being and doing, one that is post-capitalism and post-socialism, one that is grounded in love, in a new bottom line, where we measure our success, we judge institutions to be efficient, rational, and productive, not to the extent that they maximize money, power, and profit, but to the extent to which they maximize our capacity to be loving and caring, kind and generous, to build a socially, economically, and environmentally just and sustainable world, to respond to the universe with awe, wonder, and radical amazement, and to take time every day to embrace love of each other. Imagine if the institutions in our society measured their success that way. A second fundamental teaching of capitalism is that we live in a meritocracy. In other words, that your level of success, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, is a reflection of your skill as a human being. Yet we know that's not true also. And this is also starting to be shown so powerfully through the pandemic. There are systems and structures in society that shape and form, limit and prescribe the opportunities we have. Certainly some move up the economic ladder, but surprisingly few do. And those who do quote unquote make it are held up as examples, as if to say, if you just were working harder or were smarter, you too could make it like they did. Perpetuating the false narrative that we failed to make it that it is our fault that we have failed to make it. This message creates a self-blaming story in each of us, namely that it's your fault that you've not achieved enough, not been successful enough. I just want to have you take a moment and ask yourself, what is your self-blaming story? Think of a time when you've looked at someone else and thought, they're so much better or more successful than me. What's wrong with me? I know that I do this sometimes. In fact, I just started to go down that path yesterday, and I was able to pull myself back. But self-blaming, as much as it is embedded in our systems and structures, embedded in our way of being, is actually not fundamental to our humanity at all. Babies do not come into the world blaming others or shaming themselves. They do not think, wait a minute, something must be wrong with me. That baby's rolling over and sitting up, but I'm not. And yeah, we can laugh at the absurdity of this, right? Like, it seems so absurd, but at some point in our lives, that's what we do. We judge ourselves in comparison to others, and if and when we fall short, because we will always fall short of someone, we beat ourselves up and tell ourselves something is wrong with us. So what does this have to do with prophetic empathy, revolutionary love, and transforming our society? A lot. These self-blaming stories are toxic and painful. And the right, in extremely distorted ways, tells people that their pain is real, their inability to achieve the success they want is not their fault. But rather than explain, truthfully explain, that this is imprinted in the fabric of our society and systems, instead they place the blame on some other, whether it's immigrants, people of color, Jews, Muslims, LGBTQI people, women, socialists, and now all liberals. They are told that it is these others that stand in your way of your rightful place among the elite and powerful. They make people feel like they matter. And this was echoed in the echo chambers of Trump's words on January 6th when he said, "You're good people, you're patriots. I love you. I feel your pain. You're right to be angry. This election, i.e. your way of life, has been stolen from you. And this soothes their pain." And the problem with the left is that through its neoliberal pro-capitalist policies, never speaks to this pain in people's life. They propose laws and pass laws that address the economic pain and suffering and address people's political rights, namely the ways in which people and groups of people have been marginalized and oppressed. And that's really wonderful, but they don't speak to the psycho-spiritual pain in people's lives. The way in which all of us yearn to live in a world in which our needs for meaning and purpose, belonging and connection, and love and care are met. And we need to speak to these needs in real ways and to create a society that shows real subjective caring and build social change movements here and around the globe that does this as well. And so there's three things, and then I'm going to. One, we have to move. We have to understand these two divergent worldviews, and we have to move from the worldview of fear to the worldview of love. We have to help other people understand this and help them move to those from fear to love. And we do this by promoting a positive vision of the world we want, our collective dream. So rather than limit ourselves to being told to what we are told is realistic, we need to put forth the vision of a world based on that new bottom line, a caring and loving society. We need to emphasize our shared humanity through prophetic empathy, and I'll speak more about that later. And we need to honor our diversity of faith, belief, and reason. This does not mean accepting that falsehoods are truth, but rather understanding that even religious people, even people who think different from us, are smart, that their beliefs and views are worthy of respect. We can fundamentally and strongly disagree with their policies and positions, and even how they interpret and understand their teachings through the paradigm of a worldview of fear and love, while also seeing their humanity. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to jump in
Okay, I mean, you've made an incredibly powerful and wonderful statement, Kat, that really captures the a lot of the essence of my book, Revolutionary Love, a political manifesto to heal and transform the world. And if you want to take these ideas and go deeper with them, please get this book. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later. I think what you've said is just so exciting and so deep. And so I just want to go over one or two points because number one, revolutionary love is both like love and slightly different. Because most of the time in our education in this society, what we learn about love is what goes on between a couple or a family. Revolutionary love is love of all of humanity. It means that we see every other human being as embodiments of the sacred. And that's something that comes out of our religious traditions, but you don't have to be religious to hold that view. You don't have to have any view about God or what. You just have to recognize that there is something sacred about every human being on the planet, and that every one of them needs to be cherished in some way or other. That doesn't mean that the racists and the sexists and the homophobes and the anti-Semites, etc., should be allowed to do what they want to do to us. God forbid. That's what we've seen. That when that's happened, that has been terrible. But it is to accept that there's something fundamentally valuable in every person. This way of thinking came, although it's been in our sacred traditions and in the Bible, in the Torah part of the Bible, where the most frequently repeated command is this: love the stranger or the other. The Hebrew word is lager, v'ahavta lager. You should love the other one, the one who is not part of your community, who is not one of you. That appears some 37 times in the Torah, in one form or other. It's the most powerful. And why is it repeated so often? Because it's not so easy. Of course, because it's not so easy to do that. And yet that is the critical part of a spiritual practice. Unfortunately, that is not necessarily the center of many spiritual traditions. And when I speak as a rabbi, people then say, well, are Jews that way? And the answer is, yeah, some of us are, and some of us aren't. And this is true about over every religion, that every religion has the same split in it that Kat was talking about, the split between those who have been taught that this is a world in which everyone is out for themselves. And as people grow up into this world, they look around and they see people trying to maximize their own advantage without regard to the consequences for others. And as a result, they're told, and then they're told, look, this is how the world is. So you have a choice: either go for yourself and advance your own interests, or else and try to dominate other people, because if you don't dominate others, they'll dominate you and you'll be screwed over. This is just the reality of our society. And it has been the reality of basically every human society since class divisions developed in the society about 10,000 years ago. So it's very deep, but by the way, there was 90,000 years before that in which human beings weren't acting that way. Okay, that's a larger story that I'm not going to try and tell, but we see the remnants of that in some of the indigenous peoples who have tried to keep parts of the tradition that they held before domination became the reality of class societies. Okay, now that view, however, runs counter to another view that religions came to articulate, and it goes something like this: each one of us is not born into a world in which everybody is just out for themselves, because most of us are born from a mother. Now, our mother gave us the abilities to survive in the first few years of our life, because we wouldn't have survived without a mother, or at least a mothering other. It could have been a man, it could have been somebody who not related to us, but somebody who took care of us when we had no way of taking care of ourselves. And that has given us a different experience, an experience that is foundational to spiritual and religious traditions. And that is that somebody is giving to give, not giving to get. Giving to give, giving for the sake of giving, and not for the sake of getting something back in return. That experience has been tremendous. Now, some people have said to me, Rabbi Lerner, you don't know my mother. Okay, she was, you don't know how neurotic she was and whatever. So I want to stipulate to you that if you're thinking that, I'll accept that your mother at later points in your life wasn't there giving to give, she was giving to get. But the first experience that people had was a very different one, the first few years. And so your mother had no reasonable expectation of a good return on her investment of time and energy. She wasn't doing it from the capitalist model. So that experience has given birth to a whole different way of looking at the world, a way in which we understand the possibility of safety and security, not based on domination and control of others, but rather on cooperation and caring for others. That was the foundation of many of the religious traditions that have survived from in the past several thousand years. However, as ruling elites saw the tremendous attraction of those religious traditions, they themselves managed to get themselves into positions of power inside those religions, and very often led the religious communities back away from the core insight of building a world on love and caring and generosity to a world of domination. So so today, when you look at any religious community, you'll see any religion anyway, you'll see there are some communities there that are connected to the domination and power worldview, and that's how they look at the world. And there are others that are not yet connected to that still maintain some core of love, kindness, and generosity. So that split that Kat was telling you about exists even in the spiritual and religious traditions that claim to be about love, caring, and kindness and generosity, and actually are for actually advanced ideas that are for domination and power and control. Now, you might ask, how do you know this, Rabbi Lerner? What do where are you coming from? How do you claim to know all this? And my answer is this: I'm not only a rabbi, but before becoming a rabbi, I was a psychologist. And in my let's say great luck or good deeds that the university that the universe gave to me, I was granted a major research grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to study the psychodynamics of middle-income working people in work and family life. Now, in that huge study, thousands and thousands of middle-income working people, I had a particular interest that, and me and the team of people that I worked with at the organization was called the Institute for Labor and Mental Health, Institute for Labor and Mental Health, which is now the overarching framework for tikkun. By the way, tikkun, Tikkun. You can go to online and find tikkun.org. tikkun is a Hebrew word. It means to heal, repair, and transform. So it's healing, repairing, and transforming the world. Anyway, in that study, I was interested in something that was happening right at that time, which was that people whose economic interests, working class, middle income working people, even poorer people, some of them were moving to the right, even though their economic interests were with the left. And so me and my research team started to ask people, why is this happening? What is leading you to what seems to be counterintuitive to your economic needs? And what we heard was this, that many people agreed with the programs of the liberal and progressive world, but they felt disrespected by the liberal and progressive world. They didn't feel that they were being cared for. They felt, in fact, that they were that the liberal and progressive world saw them as a sort of fodder for the struggles. We want your vote. We want you to be part of us in demonstrations. But basically, we look down on your worldview. And that was particularly true of religious people, because the sad reality is that in the core of the liberal and progressive world, there is a religiophobia. And not everybody in that world is religiophobic, but there's a culture that doesn't really respect. And what they told us was this, that, you know, they want us, they want our votes, they want our they want our participation in their demonstrations and so forth, but they really don't. They have contempt for our religion, and you know, this is a country where at least half the people take religion very seriously, and so now that doesn't mean everybody in the left has contempt for religion, but there was a culture there that they were telling us about. Their experience, okay, it wasn't necessarily my experience, it was their experience, was saying, these people think that, you know, okay, fine, we'd love to have religious people in our demonstrations and in your votes, but deep down, what we're hearing, and people would talk when they overhear others in the liberal and progressive world saying something like, yeah, sure, we want them with us, and we hope that eventually they'll evolve from this religious or spiritual concern to a higher, more rational concern of those of us who have disdain for religion, or disdain for that whole way of being. And people felt it. They could feel it in their experience. And this is what they told us. And more of those people who had been voters for the New Deal, who had been voters for the Fair Deal, who had been voters for the Great Society, who even many who eventually became voters for the Clintons, started to move away. Now, of course, part of the reason they were moving away was because those societies, and Kat articulated this, that those societies didn't really deliver even on the material promises that they made. They didn't deliver because at the core of the Democratic Party, the establishment in the Democratic Party, and the, say, conservative or right wing of the Democratic Party has as its a deeper commitment to keeping the distribution of wealth pretty much the way it is right now. And as I think you know, that distribution means that there's a small group of people, less than 1% of the population, that owns and controls about 70 to 75% of all the wealth of our society, and that and more than the bottom 50% to 60% of the population. They own more. It's 1%, and the Democratic Party is not willing to challenge that, or to actually take the steps towards radical redistribution in the way that the Bible calls for, in the Torah calls for, at least every 7 years and every 50th year, the Jubilee. So they weren't willing to go there. Instead, they were holding on to that support and feeling and saying, "Hey, look, we've got to get the money to run elections, and the only way we're going to get it is to get it from the rich people because they're the ones who have the money. The rest of the society doesn't have very much." So that way of thinking and that way of acting made a lot of people say, "Yeah, it's not just a mistake that for the past 50 years, the radical unequal distribution of wealth and power hasn't changed 1% or 2%. It hasn't. It's been the same, and each of the repairs have been so minor compared to the radical inequality in society that it stayed the same. So when people are saying to them, "Oh, you're so irrational to go to the right," they say, "Yeah, well, what did the leftists deliver when it was in power? When the Clintons were in power? When the Obama was in power? Was there a real fundamental redistribution of wealth and power in the society? No way." So this is part of what you have to take into account. But the other thing that our team heard, and this was something that shocked us because we came to realize how much we had bought into the dominant way of thinking in the society. They said to us, "We want our work to have some higher meaning than just accumulating more and more money so that we could someday have work that someday retire from jobs which have no meaning except to accumulate power and money for the people who own and control the corporations. We want meaning to our life that isn't the meaning of how much money we can accumulate." Now, this shocked us because we thought as psychologists, as intellectuals, people from the universities, people in the center of the liberal culture, that we have meaning needs, but they only have material needs. What they care about is money. What we care about is something higher. Well, it turns out that that's a lie. That in fact, a very large section of the population has this hunger for meaning and purpose. And where they heard that articulated, they never heard that articulated at a progressive demonstration. And believe me, I've been part of those demonstrations for the past something like 55 years of my life. Okay, I've been part of them, and never did they hear people giving talks about the hunger for meaning and purpose, and how this society makes that very, very hard by creating work worlds in which the goal is to maximize money and power for the people who own or control those institutions. So here we have a reason where people were moving to the right, and if you go to a right-wing church, you'll find something very interesting happening there, because very many of them, now I'm not saying speaking all of them, I didn't go to all of them, I went to some of them, okay, you find that this hunger is being addressed right on. And in fact, from this very start, people are being embraced physically. You come into a church and they're embracing you physically. There's this sense of, this is a place where love is important. Now, the downside of that is that people there in many of those right-wing churches would say to people, give the following message: you know, your life is very painful. We know that. A huge amount of pain in this society. And this was the flip side of what Kat mentioned about the self-blaming story that so many people have. They blame themselves. They say, look, it's here's a tiny little percentage of people who have moved up in the society from where they were in a relatively poor or lower middle class or middle class, and they've made it to the very top. The New York Times did a study about 10 years ago and showed that it was like less than 1% of the population has had experienced any serious rise above where they were born. The surest prediction of where you will end up economically in this society is where your parents ended up. And that has been true for the past 50 years or so. So and you're blaming yourself and feeling terrible. And I didn't do the right thing. If only I had studied harder in high school. If only I hadn't screwed up in college. If only I hadn't, women have a tremendous amount of self-blame about if only I were more attractive or more charming or whatever. All kinds of self-blaming stories. They pervasive through the society. And the right-wing churches turn around and say, you know, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You didn't create this situation for yourself. You didn't make this happen. And that creates tremendous relief for people, tremendous amount of relief. Now, the bad part is that the story goes on to say, but who did it, and Kat already said this, the reason why you're in this situation is because of the demeaned others of the society. And by the way, this is a universal formula. If you go to India, if you go to China, if you go to any part of the Middle East or of Europe, you'll find the same stories. It's just the only difference is who is the demeaned other. The demeaned other changes, but it's always the same story that always your pain is because of this demeaned other. If they weren't here screwing things up in our society, everything would be great. So why am I going on like this, telling you about what's going on there? Because the current vision of that people in the liberal and progressive world have is all of those people who voted for Trump or all of those people who moved to the right in the past 20, 30, 40 years, they're all evil people. They're all evil people. So I want to say to you that part of what we've discovered in our research is it's not true. That yes, there is a core of people, 40 to 50% of them are racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, etc. But there's another half of their population that is there for a different reason. They're there because they feel put down by the left. They feel disrespected by the liberal and progressive forces. And their feeling is not irrational. Because if you ask anybody, and we did a study in 2016 to see what people in the liberal and progressive world were saying about why they lost that election. And they didn't say, oh, we lost because we didn't deliver enough under the Obama administration. It raised all kinds of hopes and then didn't follow through. No, they said, it's because those people who didn't vote for us, they're either racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, or they're just plain stupid. Now, I'm not denying that there's some people who are stupid in the right, okay? But there are other people there who are there not because they're stupid and not because they're racist, but because they feel that somebody is actually paying attention to their pain. And so this then leads us to talk about a new kind of society, the new bottom line that Kat Zavis so beautifully articulated. A society based on love and caring. We call it the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. Now, the caring society is not the same as socialism, okay? People's experience of socialism was that that it delivered the goodies. It did give them material advantages, and certainly the life of people in the socialist countries in Europe were better, much better than they had been when they didn't have that. At least in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, they called it socialism. It wasn't socialism even close. But in Western Europe, people, and you ask people if you go to, for example, Sweden or Norway or Denmark, or people still think it's a really good thing we had that. But what was delivered was material well-being, much better well-being than for working class people here. But they didn't deliver was subjective caring. Okay, it was objective caring in the form of material goods, but it didn't deal with their hunger for meaning and purpose. And so eventually people began to say, okay, we've got those material goods, we still are voting them out because they're not addressing and creating a place where we can connect to some higher meaning and purpose. So when but the liberal and progressive world today does not address that at all. Even Bernie, whom I loved and certainly was very much in favor of his candidacy, but he never got to this level. So what it's like to get to this level is what revolutionary love is all about. It's about talking about those elements. And I'm now going to turn it back to Kat, so you can take it away, my
Great, thank you.
my ally.
Thank you. So I want to turn to how it is we do this. In other words, how do we, I mentioned, and Michael's talking about this need to move from this worldview of fear toward a worldview of love and abundance and interdependence. And how do we challenge this ethos of capitalism? And of course, we've been making it very clear that first and foremost, we do this with love in our hearts, not with hate in our hearts, that we see the humanity in each other. And in addition to that, I believe that this path, I like to think of it as a path from fear to love, to understanding the ways in which capitalism harms us all, is a path paved with steps of prophetic empathy. That we can't simply tell people these things, but that we have to engage them with deep listening and engagement, with curiosity, and also with a commitment to bringing into the conversation all these concepts and ideas that we've just shared with you. And if we do this with empathy, and if we empathize with them, then if all we do is to empathize with them, we may temporarily soothe people's pain. And that's certainly an important step, but we will not be providing them with an alternative worldview and understanding. We won't be sending them, if you will, a breath of fresh air, an opportunity to understand the ways in which the systems and structures of our society harm them also. And we will not be helping them see this internal conflict that resides within them between the world in which we live and the world in which their deepest selves yearn to live in. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about this distinction between empathic listening and prophetic empathy, and then I think we'll open it up for some questions. So I'm certain that many, if not all everyone on this call and listening has an understanding of what empathic listening is or what empathy is, right? It's this way in which we're present with somebody with compassion. We're open to hearing their perspective. We listen and reflect. Sometimes we provide support. This is often at the core of pastoral care or in some instances, psychiatric and certainly social work care. It's care of really deeply listening to the extent that the other person really feels heard and understood. I like to think of it as like they feel gotten, like, oh, this person really gets what I'm saying. And through that process, people gain greater self-awareness, self-connection, they understand their yearnings and needs, and it feels important. And it's one step, but in prophetic empathy, not only are we engaging with empathic listening, but we're sharing our own truth and we're sharing our understanding of the ways in which our society is structured and the systems and structures of our society poison us all, the ways in which we're swimming in toxic waters that we are unaware of. And so it's empathy plus like understanding of trauma, understanding of systems and structures, and it's really bringing that in. It doesn't preclude actually trying to help people see a different worldview, a different understanding. So we're open and curious, and we're also speaking moral truths. We're speaking truths about the fact that when we live in a world where people don't have food to eat, they don't have access to quality healthcare, they don't have clean drinking water, they don't have a safe and secure place to live or access to good education, that there's something fundamentally morally bankrupt about that world. And in empathy, we name that as such. We don't blame individual people for the systems and structures into which they were born, but we help them understand the ways in which we participate in our societies to sustain those, and that this is unjust and immoral. And it's calling people to their highest selves. It's calling them back to that place when they weren't judging themselves about not being able to roll over or sit up, when they were able to hold in their hearts love and care and compassion and see the beauty in each other and in themselves. And that, to me, is really what prophetic empathy is all about. It's these stepping stones that we move from where we are to where we want to be. And there's lots of writing and books and stories about people who have been brought out of reactionary movements. And it's essentially been done with prophetic empathy. It's been done with steps of showing love, but also really strongly challenging people's beliefs and stories that they've been told, and helping them see that a new worldview is possible, and to help us understand actually that we all, every single one of us, go back and forth in this continuum of living in fear and love, of constricting ourselves and believing in scarcity, and opening ourselves up and believing in abundance, that all of this is present in our world, and that all of us engage in both and trying to pull ourselves as we help uplift and pull others too. So Jim, I think I'll pause there and let you jump in with some questions or comments, or I could say more specifically about like distinct steps, but I think the general, in this context, it's good enough to give the general.
Just in case people might be leaving for work now, or in the middle of, because it's towards the end of the first hour, could you just say how people could get connected to the trainings that you're doing, training people in how to be the kind of love that is prophetic empathy?
Sure. So you can learn more about our work at spiritualprogressives.org. And the training is spiritualprogressives.org/training. And the next training starts actually a week from tomorrow, February 16th at 4:30 p.m. It runs for 6 weeks, 2 hours, Pacific time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific time in the United States.
What if people don't live here? What if they're in other countries?
They can take it. It's Zoom. It's a Zoom online training, so you can take it anywhere in the world at any time. And yeah, and you can you receive all the recordings and access to all the materials, so you can also watch it during your daytime, so you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I want to just note before we jump into some questions and comments, Michael, you remind me of a Chinese painting. Most of us, like me here and Kat, our face is right up in the screen. But you've receded. You are surrounded by paper.
Yes.
And you're a small part of the screen. And it's those of us who know Michael know that that's just the perfect shot of Michael Lerner, scholar in his study, dwarfed by the amount of paper that he has produced and accumulated. So I just wanted to say it's very sweet, Michael, to see you in that kind of natural habitat.
Some people respond by saying, "What a mess! You must be so disorganized." And I say, "Yeah, I am disorganized, but still, I've produced two national bestsellers and 10 other books." So
it works. Whatever you do, it's working. So I just want to just note that, and I'd like to maybe start with a comment that Dr. Karoy Ferguson has made in the chats, which I think is worth both of your commentary. He says Martin Luther King's view of revolutionary love related to the relationship between love and power. In my view, as an African American, I think it captures the essence of today's theme. He said, quote, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power connecting everything that stands against love." Close quote. In my personal view, love sees no barriers, while fear does. Fear breeds mechanistic thinking and making objects out of people through either or dualistic ways of framing reality and self-narratives.
Mm-hmm.
How would you compare what you're thinking about in terms of revolutionary love and prophetic empathy with the understanding of Martin Luther King?
I believe that we are totally aligned 100% with what King said and taught. I had the great honor to meet with King for a few hours about a month before he was murdered. And I also earlier had gone to the March on Washington in 1963, in which he gave his famous speech. So yeah, King is one of the great heroes, and I was mentored, meanwhile, at the Jewish Theological Seminary by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with King at Selma, and who was chair of the Clergy and Laity Against the War in Vietnam, and in which King made his famous speech, moving from a purely civil rights focus to a focus on justice for everybody, including the Vietnamese, and saying, end that war. King is one of the great prophets of our time, and I think will remain that through history. And so I fully embrace what's his name, the guy who asked the question?
Dr. Ferguson.
Yeah, Dr. Ferguson, not only do I fully embrace what you say, but I'd like to invite you to consider writing for Tikkun or being part of our community in some way. And again, tikkun.org, TIKKUN.org. And or you can write to Kat at spiritualprogressives.org, spiritualprogressives.org. Kat at spiritualprogressives.org. So yeah, hey, we should be aligned.
So I'll add one or two other thoughts to that, which is obviously I agree with what Michael said. And for me, what I try to tell people when I'm doing trainings or working with people is that being in a place of prophetic empathy is not being in a place of being rolled over and bulldozed. It's a place of profound strength, a place of profound power, internal power, and boundary setting and clarity. And so that's really what resonates for me about the you read, which is there's this balance of love and power, and the balance right now is so off in terms of so much power and so little love. But love doesn't mean without power. Love means power with. Love means using our power in ways that show our care for the planet, our care for each other, and ultimately our care for ourselves. And I believe prophetic empathy is really actually a way to embody that.
So I'm going to add something on here because I think it's possible somebody to listen to all this and think, yeah, but what about the social, economic justice, social justice? Where do you stand? Or why, is this just another new agey thing of new consciousness, but not any change in the society? So I'd just like to add a few things. I'm not going to try to lay out the whole plan that we put forward in Revolutionary Love, but I'll just mention a few things. We support not a minimum wage, but a living wage. Now, a living wage is way more than $15 an hour, and a living wage means getting enough money so that you can actually support yourself, and if you have a family, then for the family. And the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, MIT, has a project called the Living Wage Project, and they figure out each year for all the major cities in the United States what would be a living wage in this city, what would be a living wage in that city, et cetera. We're for that. We're for a living wage. We're also for a guaranteed annual income, so that eventually everybody would be able to be supportive. We're in favor of a 4-day week, not a 5-day week. Give another a 28-hour week rather than a 40-hour week, and let so that we can reduce production. We're not in favor of endless expansion, acting as though the earth is a bottomless cookie jar in which you keep on taking things out of the earth and it'll replenish itself. No, what we've learned from the environmental movement is that there is a great crisis because we have been destroying the earth in order to make products, most of which aren't needed, but which they then have to spend billions of dollars each year developing a need in us for the products that then have misused and polluted the earth. So, so we want to end that. We want to end that, and one way, part of ending it is reducing the work week and giving people another day in which that day would be a family day for people to hang out with their families. Okay, so 3-day weekend, 4 days of work. Can't do it? Of course you can do it. There's nothing that's stopping us from doing it except our fantasy that it can't happen. Similarly, we support a global Marshall Plan in which the advanced industrial countries would give a percentage of their wealth each year to the underdeveloped countries, because most of the underdeveloped countries have been underdeveloped because of Western imperialism, Western colonialism. We have, that has gone on for the past 150 years. So we owe something to the peoples of the world. And by the way, that's also a way of dealing with the issue of immigration, because people say, oh, you've got to keep people out because those people will overrun the United States if everybody can come here. Well, we want open borders, but only after we've established economic parity with other countries in the world, in which we, not just the United States, but all of the advanced industrial countries, give some of what we have to help develop those countries that have been underdeveloped by virtue of us. And in that respect also, we might consider trying to work with China. Instead of assuming that China has to be our enemy, why not cooperate with them? And you can say, oh, they're doing terrible things to the Muslims there. You're right, they are. But we've been doing terrible things for African Americans for a very long time, and for other minority groups. Okay, that doesn't mean that we discard it. We need to try to influence and change it. And in this country, hopefully, do a serious re-education program, and that's also in this book, a re-education program, so that at every grade level, starting at kindergarten and going through college and graduate schools or professional schools, that people have required courses in the history and evils of racism, and also in the environmental destruction that's going on. It's only a tip of a little bit of the program. Maybe I'll give you one last thing. The Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment to the Constitution. We have and you'll find that in the book, and we have a proposal for a constitutional amendment, which number one would ban all money from politics except that which is given equally to all of the major candidates by the Congress and or by the state legislatures, and no other money allowed. Not even if you're rich, you can't give more money. If you're poor, you can't give money. No, the money comes only from equal distribution from the government. That's point number one. But point number two is, and then every corporation with incomes above $50 million a year. So I'm not talking about mom and pop stores. I'm not talking about little restaurants. I'm talking about the big corporations. Every year, every 5 years, they have to prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility. Now, to whom? To the government? No, the government has over and over again, when they have some oversee body, they fill it with the very people who are supposedly being overseen. So no, a jury of ordinary citizens that's convened once every 5 years for each different corporation has a jury that receives testimony both from the corporation's leadership, but also from their workers, but also from people all around the world who've been affected by the environmental impact of those corporations. And if they can't prove a satisfactory history, that jury can take away their license or their ability to their corporate charter, or they can give them a few years to repair what they haven't done right, and then they have to re-meet with that jury and prove that they have repaired the damage that they've been doing to the environment. So, okay, this is just to say, it's not just all sweet love, it's also real practical policies, and we've got a lot more of them in the book that we are pushing that flow from the core value of the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth.
Thank you, Michael. Let me just probe one aspect of revolutionary love in relationship to Dr. Ferguson's comment on Martin Luther King, and your comment, Kat, about the strength and power of love in relationship to labeling. There's been a number of comments in the chat about concern about labeling, either using the term racism or uneducated or wrong and so forth. But I think it's worth just remembering that both Gandhi and Martin Luther King were very clear about their willingness to use terms such as racist, colonialist, oppressor, and they were very clear about speaking truth to power. That's one reason why they were put in prison. They didn't mince words in clearly stating the evil they were confronting. Now, in our world, I find that most of the progressives in our world are very hesitant about truly speaking truth to power because they want everybody to be loved. They want everybody to be embraced. They want everybody to feel included. They want everyone to feel honored, that everyone has a story. And it's not about suppressing as much as it's about integrating everyone in together in a way that everybody feels good. And yet, the great kind of avatars of our movement, just taking Martin Luther King, Gandhi, you can also talk about Mandela and Tutu in South Africa, weren't in that frame of mind. They somehow were able to be clear with their language and yet loving with their heart. And I wonder whether, Michael, you could just comment on the use of language in revolutionary love, and how does one name evil in a loving environment?
Well, I
Kat,
think
then
one
that will probably
names,
bring us to a close.
yes, we name evil as evil. In other words, there's nothing in what I've said that says that when somebody organizes a coup against the United States and tries to overthrow the government and take over the Capitol building, that you shouldn't call that, or at least the people who were breaking windows and going inside and looking for AOC and other bright lights inside the Congress so that they could kill them. And there's nothing in us that should say we should refrain from calling them evil. There are evil people there. There are some real evil people, and we don't hesitate for a second to say that they have to be restrained, that they have to be stopped, that laws have to be passed to make sure that they can't do that again, that they can't. And similarly, when the police who, Kat, maybe you want to mention some of the more recent events of police killing, shooting people, macing people, et cetera, who are totally powerless in front of them. And yes, there are acts of evil, and there are evil people, some evil people in our police forces, and some evil people in many other places. There are also some evil people in that claim to be left, but there were evil things done in the name of the left also at times. But I have no hesitation in saying, yes, call evil evil. Just don't make it to everybody who has different views from us. Don't use that term generally, and otherwise you end up with something that actually pushes more people away. And I believe, for example, that the talk about white men in this society on part of people on the left has had a big role in pushing people away from social change movements. Because instead of saying the racism, they say, oh, white men are benefiting so much from this society. Well, no, the truth of the matter is that most people who are white are not benefiting. Now, if you say, okay, well, they're not as likely to be killed as a black person, great, but that's not a big benefit. That's something that should be for everybody as a matter of course. That of course you shouldn't be killing black people, or shouldn't be killing anybody. But the people who do that, like the ones who killed in Minneapolis last year, they should be brought to trial and punished, and eventually perhaps transformed. So yeah, we're not for sweetness and light, regardless of how evil they are. I'm so glad that some of the perpetrators of the Holocaust were brought to trial and punished. However, an awful lot of them were brought back to the United States and employed by our Defense Department. Terrible, terrible crime. And because we then decided, the United States decided after the Second World War, oh, as long as we're in a war, let's get rid of the communism in the Soviet Union. Well, I hated what was going on in the Soviet Union. I am so glad that it was eventually overthrown, but Putin isn't so much better. Anyway, so yeah, there are lots of evil people, and we have to call them on it, but we should avoid taking a whole group of section of the people in the country and saying they are evil, or that they are benefiting from evil. Be careful in how we use that. Kat, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say a little bit just about that. I want to be careful, because I think what we really want to be saying is that people get swept up into movements that are toxic, that are that perpetuate separation and fear, and that can drive people to think that certain people are other, that certain people are less than, and that can drive people then to do acts that are very evil and dangerous. But we believe that in the essence of every human being, there is, Michael, maybe unplug the phone or turn off the phone, or silence mute yourself, Michael. Michael, mute yourself. Just mute yourself. Oh, good, somebody muted him, great. That within every single person, there is fundamentally goodness. There is fundamental love and goodness. And we get distorted over the course of our lives from personal traumas and from collective traumas, from our individual family traumas, our educational system, from the conditioning of society. We get socialized, and if you will, we get pulled away from the place in which we're born, where if you see a child and you hand them, a young child, and if you hand them something after they put it in their mouth and check it out, they'll hand it back to you. There's this inherent desire for connection, for love, for being held, and for loving the other. So I want to really emphasize that when you use the term that they are evil, that you don't actually mean that they are inherently evil, but that over the course of their life, they've been distorted. Their humanity has been distorted, if you will. Their sense of connection with their own humanity has been distorted. And that is painful for the world and for themselves.
Well, thank you, Kat. Thank you, Michael. We are wrestling with a great conundrum between social justice and a cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and dark on the one hand, and the command on all of our parts from all of our traditions to love one another, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think the great contradiction that the progressive movement has wrestled with from the beginning, all of us who are seeking social justice, is how do we work for justice in a spirit of love. And Malini Rajendran has made a comment in the chats that I think is maybe a nice note with which to close. She says, it takes unconditional love to distinguish the person from the deed. And I think that's an important consideration as we are today coming up on the impeachment trial of Donald Trump this week. How do we separate the person from the deed? How do we embrace the possibility of transformation in every person, no matter how nasty or wicked they have been? So I think it's worth just leaving revolutionary love and empathic, prophetic empathy as great questions and great challenges before all of us. And I thank you, Kat and Michael, for your wisdom with us today. And I want to say that all of you who are able, we have an after session chat group, which is more informal. There's a link in the chat there that you'll see if you would like to join for 5 or 10 minutes. I think people would welcome a more informal and deeper dive with both of you. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to be talking with Vladimir Posner, who has been a journalist in the Soviet Union and now Russia for many, many decades. He was born in France. He lived in the United States. He speaks flawless French, Russian, and English. And he is going to help us come to understand, I think, a little bit more deeply Vladimir Putin, And this is an example of what we're talking about. Most people in the United States consider Vladimir Putin evil, particularly given what happened to Alexei Navalny recently, where the Kremlin apparently poisoned him and he was rushed to a German hospital, healed, went back, and they promptly put him in prison. So there's a lot of negative hostility against Vladimir Putin. But what Vladimir Posner, who's the most popular journalist in Russia today, is going to challenge us with is that it's the United States and NATO policies that have actually shaped and created Vladimir Putin. And that's also worth our contemplation as we think about evil in the world, the complexity of the shadow. It's highly, highly complex. And so we've got Vladimir Posner, and he'll be joined by Cynthia Lazaroff and Jim Hickman, who've been working in Russian-Western relations for many, many decades to really understand what's been going on between Russia and the West, particularly in the person of Vladimir Putin. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising, how the United States has created Vladimir Putin. So thank you, everyone. Kat, Michael, splendid session on revolutionary love and prophetic empathy. And I would encourage all of you to look up the Network of Spiritual Progressives, to look up Tikkun Magazine. It's one of the great progressive voices of our time. Thank you all. See you again tomorrow here on Humanity Rising. Bye-bye. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.